Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet from the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemot, Highland Park, New Jersey. Joining me, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City. Rabbi Barry Chasler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island. It's great to see you all.
Great
we
to
are
be
recording
here.
this. It's Thursday, January 7th. So it's important that we mention that because I think we're all still quite rattled by the events of the last 24 hours. And we have to begin to think about this. And one of the things that we do here, I think, just in terms of studying the Torah and in our conversations is we are trying to reflect on the world through Torah. I think that's certainly the aim of Torah studies, to reshape the way we think about the world. And given the trauma of the last day's events, the storming of the Capitol, I can't think of another way to think about this than the violation of sacred, the idea of the sacred. We were saying, maybe it would have been better that if we are in a Parsha in Vayikra to talk about this, but just let's spend a moment to think about A, the idea of the sacred in the secular society, and B, how Torah shapes our understanding of this. Barry, you want to try to go with this?
So in this regard, there's an obvious connection, I think, with the scene of the burning bush. Moses turns aside to see why the bush is burning but not being consumed, and God tells him that he's on holy ground and he must take off his shoes. And there's a reverence that goes with sacredness, that how we approach it. And we live in more or less a secular society, even though people think of America as fundamentally more religious than some of the European countries with established religions. But we have holy secular spaces, as it were, and the Capitol is certainly one of them. The mall in Washington, and this from one end to the other, it encompasses a kind of sacred space. It's where we learn, in a sense, how to be American. It has our great institutions, political, educational, cultural institutions, and it needs to be treated with reverence. And we don't necessarily need to hear a voice of God to tell us that, but we do need to think about how we act in it.
In other words, there are literal boundaries around that plan, and literal physical boundaries, of course, now more so, and that when you are in that area, you are part of a story, a sacred narrative, and you're entering a reverential space. Jeremy, you want to? Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing. It's a living tradition. This goes back to our founding as a country. You're not just there the day that you're there. You're there for the sum of our entire history as a nation.
Yeah. Jeremy,
this is a religion. Our Jewish religion is so as inherited, of course. Maybe much less so in the non-Orthodox realms now, but the religion we've inherited is incredibly detail-oriented, and those details enable the behaviors that we engage in to have great heft and great meaning. The scholar of religion died a couple years ago, Jonathan Z. Smith, said that holiness is a method of designating how to pay attention. Like, this is a special moment. It's not an ordinary moment. This is a special place. It's not an ordinary place. Any old action is not okay. A special action is required. And we do have those things in the American civil religion. If you've ever seen, like an honor guard, we've all seen it in funerals, the honor guard, the reverence with which the people in uniform fold up a flag and place it on a coffin. That is a religious ritual. As detail-oriented and has the kiddusha in the secular context that we would associate with, putting on tefillin or any of the other kinds of religious rituals that we have. And those are the things that make it special. And I do feel that our orientation to the sacred spaces in American civil religion partakes of some of that. I would also say that, we don't want to get too partisan. Some of our listeners may think there's any number of good things that the outgoing president has done, and they may have voted for him, whatever, even though I certainly did not. But one of the things that I think is really that I'm taking away from these last certainly months, but over the years, we've spoken about in American public life how many norms the current president broke, and how many of the expectations, and that's one of the things that people liked about him, is that he broke windows. He broke windows in human behavior, and he thought nothing about violating all sorts of expectations about what it means to quote unquote act presidential. I got to say, I think that the American public life is far the worse for it, and it makes me feel religious about the value of, I will put in quotes, halacha. Halacha, expected behaviors, the ways in which we invest our behavior with importance, specialness, discipline. That's what makes it possible to hold things in reverence. And if you think that it is okay to run roughshod over every norm, to violate, all sorts of expectations, to thumb your eye at what the world expects from you, you're going to find a society that does not know how to hold things in reverence, that breaks boundaries in very destructive ways. I'm thinking about the rage with which I saw the video of some of the invaders, insurrectionists or whatever you'd call them. This guy had a helmet and he was smashing the windows in the Capitol. And I thought, this is intimately related to a feeling that the president can say, I can say and do whatever I want. I'm the king. And
there are many currents, and I guess also the pagan current in that as well. But I want to ask another question, which is, given the way that we frame these kinds of experiences, the desecration of the holy precincts requires a kind of purgation and an atonement, and also a reconsecration, and we don't have that vocabulary, that ritual vocabulary. What I said to someone today is, what America needs is a mikveh, right? America needs to go to the mikveh. You need a way to symbolically, be cleansed and to purify, and that's why we have Yom Kippur, because there are certain things you can't erase, like the ultimate.
Right, but we have that in America too, although it'll be curious how it plays itself out. In the sense, the inauguration is a kind of cleansing ritual, because it's always been a peaceful transition. And the previous president, I think with the exception of John Adams, has been there to watch the successor take the mantle. And I think that it functions in a way of purgation and cleansing. I think Senator Romney spoke very well. As we all know, he experienced himself the bitterness of defeat, but he paid homage to that secular sacred tradition, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I think that, listening to you, Elliot, I was struck by the line that comes early on in the Parsha, Vayakom melech hadash lo yada Yosef.
Go back to
Now we have a president who's almost not recognizable. He's not the old president that we knew. And I don't mean to cast aspersions and identify him with Pharaoh, but he's someone new. In other words, something happened yesterday that the physical windows were broken. We could deal metaphorically with broken windows. It's much harder to deal with the violence of a physical window and broken glass that you step on.
So let's go into the part.
If I can just, before we leave this real quick, I just want to make two quick points. This is on Parsha. The Melech Hadash Asher Lo Yadat Yosef, the new king who did not recognize Joseph. I think that societies have to hold the people who contributed in previous eras with reverence. I'm just reminded how this, obnoxious man made fun of John McCain, who behaved with mind-blowing nobility in Vietnam and and in American public life, even though I didn't agree with John McCain about any number of things, and this president says, basically never heard of him. Tell me about somebody who didn't get captured. Horrifying. But I want to, Elliot, I love that comment about the mikvah. And I was thinking about something a little bit different from a piece of liturgy that we recited last month. I'm thinking about in the Al Anisim, it says, V'achar kein ba'u vanecha lidvir veitecha. So after the war, the children come to the desecrated sanctuary, ufinu et hechalecha v'tiharu et mikdashecha, and they clear out the wreckage, and they sanctify what was holy. V'hidliku nerot bechatzrot kodshecha, and then they lit the lights. V'kavu shmonat yimei Chanukah elo lahodot lahalel, and they created the ritual for the future. And I love that stage of they arrive at the mess, they have to clean it, then they have to purify it, then they have to light it. And I think that we may find ourselves, first we got to figure out what is a mess, what is the destruction. We have to lefanot, we have to clear out the destruction, and then litaher, and purify what's left. But we will be able to lahadlik, because this is a great country with great institutions that, despite it all, actually survived and will survive. So
I think that just suggests the power of both Torah in the largest sense. And I want to, on behalf of our listeners, really appreciate, because that does provide a kind of frame and a map for us conceptually to think through what is deeply traumatic. And also, I think you were speaking to the power of ritual. We have our own debates about, can we, what's the prayer you say at this moment? I don't know what the prayer that you say at this moment is. All the prayers are inadequate. Even the 23rd Psalm is inadequate. The 121st is inadequate in some ways. Study is important, but even study is inadequate. Study, it helps us intellectually. There's a visceral need for an emotional connection. And that's why I think we're all yearning for what's that symbol to do? What's the thing to do? Which is what I say, the mikvah, or something like kindling, bringing light into the world. So it's deeper than that and deeper than that. Okay, let's make a soft pasuk and obviously not, but going back to the disjunctive moment in the Parsha by Yaakov Melech Hadash, and here reading it on so many different levels, because he is a different person, he is a different set of policies, and of course we have that lovely debate within the Midrash about is it the same, or is it a pharaoh with new policies, and how the shift really shakes up the body politic. But the most important moment, Hine Am B'nai Yisrael. It is a people now. It's the first reference to B'nai Yisrael as Am B'nai Yisrael. And it's a subtle moment, but it should not be lost on anybody reading this. We have reached the moment where we have a people. And now, of course, Hava Nitchak Malo. Jeremy.
Well, I would turn it to Barry. He had a great observation.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So this is a great line. The children of Israel have become very numerous. The Egyptians are afraid that they may one day lose their country, be overrun by the immigrants, and they're looking to craft a policy. And so the policy, as we know, at the end of chapter 1, is that they're going to have all the newborn males thrown into the river Nile, which in terms of Egypt is quite symbolic. The Nile is the life source and force in Egypt. It gives them the water that they need for everything. But the rabbis connected with Noah's flood in the sense that when Pharaoh says, let us deal wisely with them, the Pharaoh and his advisors know enough Torah to know that in the beginning of the Sefer Breshit, in the story of Noah, God said he would not bring another flood. And therefore, they think they're immune from punishment, which they understand has to be midah, keneged midah, tit for tat, I guess we would say in popular language. So by throwing them into the Nile, God will not be able to punish them with a flood, and therefore they'll be able to get away with their heinous crime. But as Rashi notes, following the rabbinic tradition, what Pharaoh didn't take into account is that God only promised he would not bring a flood over the entire world. He could bring a local flood. And we know the end of the story is when Pharaoh and his army is going to drown in the Sea of Reeds. So it is going to be Midah Keneged Midah. But I had a professor in Spertus College of Judaica, Byron Sherwin, Zichrono Lebracha, who liked to say that the devil can quote scripture, but if he were really smart, he would quote Talmud too. So the way the rabbis imagine Pharaoh and other characters like this is they always know Torah Shebachtav. They read Parsha Noach maybe when we did as well, but they don't know the Talmud. They don't know the rabbinic prism by which we refract the Torah every week. It's not enough to read the Torah. We need the Torah Shebal Peh as well. And this fits in with your observations about halakha, Jeremy.
So, okay, so we have the beginnings of what really ensue as a genocidal policy against these Hebrews, way out of proportion in terms of their population, most likely. And emerging from them are acts of resistance, Shifran Puah, the Mialdot Ivriot, the Hebrew midwives. We have to give credit to a whole number of women in this story. The mother of Moses, the sister of Moses, Shifra and Puah, maybe they're the same person. The daughter of Pharaoh, Zipporah, also a lot of women in the story. But I want to just let's for the sake of time, and I know we spoke a lot about current events, but we got to talk about this person Moses and the formation of Moses. Jeremy, take me into, if you were going to do a biography of Moses documentary, how would you stage the early years of Moses and the crisis moment?
Well, the first thing I want to say about Moses, which is so interesting about the Torah's telling here in Exodus chapter 2, Vayelech ish mi beit Levi vayikach et bat Levi, and the Levite man marries a Levite woman, and then goes through the whole story, and everybody is nameless. There are no names. Even the daughter of Paro, she's just described. It's not her name. Her name is not Bat Paro. We have a tradition, Midrashic tradition, that her name is. Everyone always says the word Bitia. I don't understand why it's Bitia. It's Batia, but whatever.
Okay.
It's a story about
the Egyptian accent.
It's so Exodus chapter 2 tells it. If we were doing it cinematically, it would all be dark and it would be gray and everybody would be faceless, and that's how oppression has left them. They're just nameless, they're just faceless, but the two of them do have a romantic sexual relationship, and she has the beautiful baby, Vatero Toki Tovu, and she sees that he's beautiful. And in the Midrash, we are told that just at his birth, he filled the place with light. And she hides him for 3 months until she can't hide him anymore, because the Nazis, also known as the Egyptians, are going to come and find them and kill the babies. And she puts him in the river, and Pharaoh's daughter finds him, and she opens up the basket, and she sees this beautiful baby and the redemptive moment, and she takes him and she gives him crashing cymbals, rising light, the name in this book that we Jews call the Shemot, this book of names. Moses gets this name. It's really interesting to wonder how it is that this Egyptian-speaking woman gives him a Hebrew-related name. I mean, there's an answer to this question, that Mos in Egyptian means something like son of, and there's probably some kind of like a cross-linguistic pun that she called him something Egyptian, but our Torah turns it into a name which means draw out of the water. It seems like it should be Mashui. His name is that he is drawn, but he is the Moshe. He is the one who will draw them out of the water. And this kind of birth story is so dramatic, so cinematic, so spectacular. It's just crashing cymbals and rising light, and it's amazing. And he Yeah.
Go into
Go
the
ahead.
next verse. I'm going to read it, and I want you to comment now with that hat on. Vayihi b'yamim hahem vayigdal Moshe vayetze el echav. Moses grew up. He goes out among his brothers. Vayar besivlotam, sees their pain, their anguish. Vayar ish mitzri, sees an Egyptian makei shivri me'achav, smiting a Hebrew. Vayifen kovacho, vayar ki ein ish, vayachet hamitzri vayitmenenu b'cho.
So Moses, in a sense, is what among the really interesting things about him is that he is a boundary crosser. Okay, he clearly has grown up. Pharaoh's daughter has taken him into her house and has raised him, but he is not totally lacking in knowledge of his Israelite background, because his mother has been his nurse, was the Meneket, literally nursed him as a baby, and they had some sort of relationship. But he hasn't been oppressed. Is there something going on here that says that the Egyptians beat out of the Israelites the instinct for, or the capacity for, rebellion and freedom? They were crushed. They really were broken spirits. But Moses was not. He is emotionally connected to his Israelite people, but by virtue of growing up in strength and power and affluence, he had it in him to be able to be the one who was not only drawn out of the water, but draws out of the water. So when he, in that position of relative power, sees the oppression, he rises up against it. Moses is going to be consistently in our Parsha represented as somebody who comes to the aid of the defenseless. It's 3 times in a row, 3 times in 3 successive verses, or maybe it's 5 or 6 verses, but it's 3 immediate things. He rises up against the Egyptian beating the Israelite. He intervenes between the 2 Israelites who are fighting, and he saves the daughters of Yitro when the male shepherds are harassing them. He rises to their defense. Moses is a guy who feels his responsibility and feels the capability of defending the defenseless.
I want to add something here. So Vayared Achav, he sees his brethren, his brothers. What he actually sees is that his circle of family gets wider and wider, because it's not just the Israelites, it's the foreigners as well. He really, by the time he gets to Midian, he has no stake in the game, right? They're not, he could walk away, but he chooses to get involved. And I think the moment here is that Moses, on this particular day, sees that his brothers are the ones who suffer. It's not necessarily biological, although we know that it is here in part, but it is almost political, as it were, because as you said, he always defends the defenseless. And think about what's going to happen in the next chapter. He's going to chase after the poor sheep that has wandered away from the flock and discover his mission in life.
I think also there's an issue of identity here. Moshe is, he's out of adolescence. There's no concept of adolescence here, but he's in young adulthood. He's asking, who am I? Who am I? And at the critical moment, when he sees this oppression and he sees the abuse, he says, this is who I am. And he's perfectly differentiated from his Israelite brother, having grown up in the privilege of the Pharaonic household, and he's differentiated from the Pharaonic household by virtue of the adoption. Well, let's move on into
this is great. This is great because are you going to the burning bush now?
I'm going to go to burning bush, but go ahead.
Because this is exactly right, because the story of the burning bush and so much of this whole thing is about revelation of identity, revelation of self, revelation to yourself. Because he's going to say, Mi anochi ki elech el paro. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Which on one level is, well, who am I to take on such a big task? But I think on a deeper level is exactly what you just said, Elliot. The question is, who am I? What do I stand for? What are my life commitments?
And so when he finally goes down to see the bush, and God calls him Moshe, Moshe, or Moshe, Moshe, or however you want to hear.
They're making a new movie, and I heard that they're going to ask you to play the voice of God.
The voice, right? I got to do it. Moshe, Moshe, Vayomer Hineni. Al tikrav halom, shal nalecha me'al raglecha. Don't come hither. Take your shoes off. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admat kodesh. And the ground that you're standing on is holy ground. And we talked about that, the kind of boundary space, the sacred space. And then cutting through a few verses, he asked God, who, after saying, Mi anochi, and who am I going to tell is sending me? Vayomer Elohim Moshe, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. We don't even know how to translate that. Do you want to give it a shot, Barry?
Yeah, I like Martin Buber's translation. I will be however I will be. That what God's revelation is that he will appear at a time of his own choosing and in a form of his own choosing. And the bush itself alerts us to what comes through in the rest of the Torah, that the great images of God are a fire, a cloud, and the wind. All things that have substance, but no fixed form. You could only paint a picture of a fire at a moment, because in the next moment it's changed its shape. And so God is amorphous, with no fixed, not without form, but with no fixed form.
Okay.
And he opens himself up to God. And I think part of it is a clue to what's going to happen later, because the people are going to want God to be there, and God's not going to show up. And then we'll finally get to the whole idea of Hester Panim, of God hiding his face. But even when God is acting normally, he's only there when he wants to be there.
It's interesting that you say that, because obviously there's a way in which that's absolutely true. That is part of our experience, that God, can sometimes give us Hester Panim and sometimes not. But the plot, at any rate, of the burning bush is Ehyeh imach.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be there with you. And so there is like the fire, first of all, you said fire and wind, and what was the third thing?
Cloud.
It calls to mind, Malachim chapter 19 with Elijah at Chorev again. God was not in the fire, and God was not in the wind, God was not in the earthquake, but the still small voice. There's a way in which God is surprising. But I do think that this passage wants to emphasize that though God may be amorphous, changing, impossible to define because beyond our ken, but also reliable, and I'll be with you. I think that's a really important part of this passage.
When I teach this, it's relational. Ehyeh imach asher ehyeh imach, and that we've truncated the imach. And I think there's a little Rashi. Harold Kushner, in his book, the last book that he wrote, has a lovely chapter on this, in which he talks exactly about that. That this, I will be with you, and notice, and of course, we're just meeting Moshe right now in Parshat Shemot. That relationship is going to change over time. That both God and Moshe are going to grow in this relationship, and in a way, it stands in for how relationships evolve over time. Moshe, we spend so many summers talking about the end of the story. The mature Moshe, the Moshe who's been through all the different experiences. Here, we're seeing for the first time as a group, the Moshe, just coming out of the basket, literally being born and out of the Nile, and to be told, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, with the meaning, I will be with you as I will be with you, the way I will be with you, the way I've been with everybody before. I think, has a strong resonance for us. So just, we don't have a lot of time left, but just we go into the rest of the story, which is that Moshe is so concerned about being taken seriously. And I want to just explore this for a moment. Hein lo yaminu li. They're not gonna believe these Jewish people. We're tough people.
By the way, he's right. He's right. They don't believe him. They don't believe him.
Doing a very difficult task. Oh, go on, Jeremy.
He's right, because he knows that they don't have the capacity. V'lo shamu el Moshe. This is the beginning of next week's parsha. Mikotze ruach ume'avuda kasha. They don't heed his message because they are worn out. They are crushed in spirit, and he's right. And he has a sense that this task is really beyond him. And the negotiation until God finally gets kind of mad at him and says, "Will you shut up and do what I'm telling you to do?" But the tremendously powerful passage. Moses, I can't do this, and I can't do that, and I can't do this, and I can't do that. I can't do the third thing, and I can't do the fourth thing. Misam pele Adam.
Yeah.
Who gave you a mouth? Who made you, deaf or hearing or blind or sighted? I gave you the mouth. I gave you the capacity. Do it.
Right, but there I think the mouth is described as a tool. So of course Moses has a mouth, but he still needs words. And he still needs to be able to perform. What strikes me here is that there's a kind of double vision that's going to play itself out through the entire book of Exodus and in some ways throughout the rest of the Torah, that seeing is not just with your eye or mind and what is in your heart. So, I will be with you, but you may not recognize how I am there. That's God talking to Moses. Moses is saying, I can't do this because I don't have the tools to do this. And, I have to say, I was studying this with Carol earlier in the week, and there's this really odd thing where here I think it says that he's described as aral safatayim, of circumcised lips, or kavod peh, the heaviness of mouth. The only evidence for that comes from Moses himself. No one else, if I remember correctly, describes him in that way. He describes himself that way. And let's face it, the text of the Torah is mostly Moses' words. It's great poetry. It's, brilliant narration. Okay, the laws could be a little dry at times. We get that. But there's no evidence for that self-description. Moses, and here I think what we have to define ma'amin as trust. He doesn't feel himself trustworthy. He doesn't have enough confidence in himself. And how does God give him the confidence? In a sense, he makes him into God, because there's that great line, I can't remember if it's the end of this week or the beginning of next, where Aaron is going to be the prophet and Moses is going to take on the role of God.
Yeah.
So God won't have to say anything. And that gives us insight into the way that God appears.
Yeah.
And Aaron is going to be the mouthpiece.
Can we just touch on Aaron for a second? So Moshe is told to go back, okay? And we're gonna I want to maybe end with this or pre-end with this. Lech likrat Moshe. Vayomer Adonai LaAharon. Go. God says to Aaron, Lech likrat Moshe midbar. Go see your brother in the desert. Vayelech. He goes. Vayifkeshehu bahar Elohim. They meet at the mountain of God. Vayishaklo. And they kiss each other. And I still have the echoes. I miss all my patriarchs. I miss that conflict. They love each other. The brothers love each other. You said to someone last week, Ephraim and Asher, this is the only pair that really has, mutuality with them. And Moshe and Aaron they don't have any problems. It's normal. It's normal. We've put all the sibling issues behind us. Here are two brothers. They're going to share in the leadership in some way. One is going to be the spokesperson, one is going to be the charismatic leader, and it's here. And so at the very end of the Parsha, and maybe I don't want to end on a down note, but it says, Moshe, they don't believe. Why did you make it so bad for this people? Jeremy.
Well, about so many things in life, and maybe this ties us back to the first part of the conversation about the crisis in public life in America we have right now. You want things to be a smooth 45-degree angle upward.
Yeah.
And you figure like you're starting a process and it should work, right? But the reality is that transformations are slow and erratic, and sometimes they get better and sometimes they get worse. We have a wonderful midrash. This is one of my favorite midrashim. That before God created this world, God was borei olamotu maharivan. God was building and creating worlds. And if you want to think that everyone was better than the one before until they got good enough, okay, that's fine. But what if they weren't better? What if sometimes the destroyed world was better than the one that succeeded it? And what if, in trying to make a transformation for the better, you break some things and you screw some things up, and sometimes they get worse. And so my reading of this piece at the end, and very interesting, of course, that the Torah, the tradition has broken the parshiot here.
Yeah.
Like it's broken the parasha at like a really bad, scary, inauspicious moment of Moses complaining, like, this sucked, man. This isn't the way I thought it was going to be at all. But the spiritually and morally, committed person says, all right, we're not done yet. We're going to have to keep digging through the darkness.
Barry, last word.
So, yeah, I think this ties in very well with the Avodah Kasha at the beginning of the Parsha. Slavery is one form of hard work, but community building and community redeeming is another kind of hard work. When we say we don't want to be slaves, it doesn't mean that we don't want to work hard, because we have to do that, as Jeremy indicated. What it means is we want to be able to control our own work. We want to be able to bring ourselves wholly to it and not be told what we have to do. But the work itself is hard. And since we began on politics, we'll end on politics as well. I was reminded, someone was complaining about the president not having any easy decisions. And the answer that was given is that by the time the president has to make a decision, by definition, it's not easy, because you have all those people underneath you to make the easy decisions. It's only when it's impossible that it gets to the president's desk, and then the president has to make a decision. And of course it's hard, but that's the job. And Moses' job is that same job. He has to make decisions, and it's not hard. I mean, it's not easy. It is in fact very hard, and you have to keep working at it, because we don't get rest from that kind of work until we die.
So this is a good point to really wrap the bow on our conversation, because I think, first of all, we've given such a great insights into, you've given such great insight into the center, but also, and in terms of shaping ideas and real comfort for the moment that we're in, I don't think we could do much better than spending some time with the Torah and with good friends and thinking about it. And
Agreed.
wishing everyone a beautiful Shabbat. If you want to talk to us, parshatalk@gmail.com. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat and a good, peaceful week ahead. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.